Hello everyone, good morning. Few days back we conducted a successful live event or workshop on Git and GitHub, and it was great to see such a overwhelming response from you all. On that line, now we have organized another event for you, which is focused on placement preparation, and today we are going to meet Sandeep, who is working as an associate software engineer at the Goldman Sachs. He'll be sharing with us his experience of preparing for campus placements or the interview process in general. He would be more than happy to throw some lights on various how, what, and why scenarios that students encounter while preparing for placements or interviews. We encourage students to join us for a wonderful session and post their queries in the live chat. So this session will go in such a way that first Sandeep will take few minutes to present what he has in mind for all of you, and thereafter he can take your live queries and respond to them. So let's welcome Sandeep and thank him for taking out time from his busy schedule and sharing his valuable experience with all of us. So let's welcome Sandeep and give him 1 minute to switch the screen.
Hi everyone, I'm Sandeep Uniyal. I'm currently working as an associate at Goldman Sachs. I would like to thank the Easy Council first of all, and for inviting me here to have great session with students and all the audiences who are joining today. Uh, it's a great pleasure to share my experience and to answer all your queries that you might have. So today we'd be covering uh, some of the things that I've listed on the screen. You must be able to see. Uh, so, and in the middle, feel free to ask any questions or drop any queries in the live chat. We would be happy to answer this. So I'll be mostly focusing on these things, and it's not limited to the placements only, but in any interview process in general. But major focus is going to be on the students who are currently preparing for the interviews, who are undergrad and probably third year or fourth year students who are uh, basically trying to join the companies now. Some of they already be sitting in the placements and have a lot of questions in their mind. So we will be majorly focusing on those, but feel free to ask any questions which are not covered in this presentation, because apologies I couldn't get time to put all these things here, but feel free to ask any questions which are not covered or which you feel might be relevant, not just for the placements but for interviews in general. So the things we would be covering are first is the common myths that we all have about the placements. And I remember time when I was uh, preparing for my placements in college, and there were a lot of budge going around that you should have this that in your resume or you should be preparing like this. So it would be kind of we'll try to break out those myths and see what comes out of that. The next we are going to cover is what and how to prepare for the placements. So we'd be covering most of the things that you should know before you sit for your placements regarding your computer science fundamentals, data structure algorithms, coding, and all that stuff. Next is which most of us are very keen on, programming languages, which is actually a backbone of the software industry. And whenever we enter any industry or as a computer science engineer or any software engineer for that matter, we have to work on some programming language. So that's the thing that day in day out you do. That will be a major focus today, and then the role of projects in your interview. So we kind of get to work on different projects while we are pursuing our BTech, Bachelor of Engineering, or any BCMC students. We get to work on different projects, but how much of those projects should be in your resume is the focus. Next is aptitude. I'll be discussing about that later. Then your resume, and finally your communication. And we'll be taking questions as and when we see posted in the live chat, and we'll be discussing that. So let's move on. And so yeah, the first myth about placement is competitive coding. You all would have heard about how much important competitive coding nowadays is, and everybody is kind of uh, work practicing questions on one or the other side. But is it really important? How much of is it really important, and how much of a coding you should be doing? So to be honest, yes, it helps if you are a competitive coder, but that's not the only thing. It could be necessary, but it's not sufficient for you. So as a computer science engineer, or as a software engineer, it's not the thing that you should be looking at in particular. I might be sounding a little uh, you know avoiding the situation where you go for coding, and just sounding a little ignorant, but yes, that's the truth. You should know how to code, but competitive coders are very different than engineers alone. So when you are trying for a company, or you're uh, you're looking for a product or service based company to work on, competitive coding is not the only solution. They are looking for a complete computer science engineer who knows the fundamentals, who knows data structuring algorithms, who know database management systems, who knows operating systems, who knows computer networks, and a lot of other things. So just r- putting a piece of code together, and trying to solve very hard questions and design problems is not the only way. So you should be focusing on your fundamentals first thing. I mean, general way of saying this is, if you know your computer science fundamentals, knowing a little bit of coding is enough. But you're a good competitive coder and you're lacking your computer science fundamentals, which might not be true in all the cases, but it doesn't work. So you should be very thorough with your computer science fundamentals first, and then you should go for the competitive coding. That should be the way how this should be done. uh, Next is, Uh, so a lot of people are focusing more on the buzzwords that they hear around, and a lot of uh, talk is about machine learning, artificial intelligence nowadays, and a lot of technologies which are coming in. But believe me, this is not the only way. As a fresher, if a company is interviewing you for their company, they would never be looking for somebody who is efficient, proficient in artificial intelligence, machine learning, or any core technology. So what they focus is on how your thought process is, how you try and approach a problem, and if you know the fundamentals. So I think uh, the more we talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, the more we know that we don't know anything about it. So it's not a very basic thing. It's a very broad and complex thing to know. So, and there are a lot of other things which are involved. So if you do not know those things before, there is no point in attempting a machine learning or artificial intelligence thing before just knowing all the things about it. So I think first thing I would recommend is knowing your fundamentals, then progressing gradually towards these. Next thing that I have come across, and I have been I've been asked these questions in the past. How many of those projects that you do during your BTech, or during your uh, graduation should be on your resume? So simple answer to this is, see, if you have a lot of projects on your resume, either you should know all of them end to end. You should be ready to answer all the questions regarding those. So better is, so if you have a lot of projects, you are going to be preparing for a lot of other questions that might come your way. So as a fresher, we would be covering more of this later, but it's not a need. It's more about the quality and not the quantity of the projects. So the next is what to prepare for your placements. We'll be going round and round on this, but yes, one most important thing is one of the programming languages. So you all must have started with C or C++, but you should keep in mind that C is not a OOPS language, so you should avoid preparing that for an interview. Yes, you should have a knowledge of it because there are a lot of other companies who are working on basically the data layer. Like you could talk about Cisco or Samsung, who are more involved in embedded programming or data layer programming. They will be querying you for pointers and all of this stuff. So you should be familiar with the C concepts, basically pointers. But for an interview, you should be attempting for a language, and you should be very proficient in a language which has OOPS concept. So you can pick any language like C++, Java, Python, or any language for that matter, and start practicing on that. And what to prepare in that is always do not go for 2 to 3 languages at a time. Just try and work on one language and uh, you know get your hands dirty on that. Try brainstorming on that. Know multiple things around it. That should be enough. The only thing that matters is you know how OOPS paradigm works, and you should be able to code in that language. So it's not about knowing that okay, Python is something which is trending nowadays, and there are a lot of jobs which are being created. I think that's something when you enter in the industry, you can have a different career path than expected, but you could work that out when you're already have gone into an industry and you're working out. Uh, then whenever you prepare for a language, you should be ready for a lot of theoretical questions that might come your way. It's not about coding, but knowing your stuff. Uh, think of you're not sitting in front of a computer and you have a regular conventional way of dealing with the things, and you are asked to design a system on pen and paper. You should be able to know all the OOPS concepts. You should be familiar with the ER diagrams. You should be able with the use case come up with the use case diagrams and all that stuff. So be proficient in knowing all the concepts, all the theoretical concepts of an OOPS language. Like there could be abstraction, inheritance, encapsulations, and how if I talk about C++, there is virtual classes, there are interfaces in Java, there are a lot of other things. So you should be able to answer those questions. Next thing is you should be able to you should have hands-on practice on the language that you're projecting that you know. So be prepared to write code in that language. It's not wise to put a language in your resume and then code in a different language. So let's say you put Java on your resume, but then you're trying to code in C++ or Python. That doesn't uh, reflect good. So try to put a language and know it in and out. Try to code in that language. Stick to your skill and work it out. What a lot of people miss out, and a lot of students who don't know about is exception and error handling. Now this is something which is very tricky, and you should when we code in general, nobody is actually focusing on exception and error handling. So uh, be advised to focus on this. So whenever you're trying to code, try to focus on the basic requirements. Whenever you're coding, let's say you have something like a divide by zero exception. Whenever you're coding, when your program breaks, just don't ignore it. Try to add some exception handling there because this is what companies care about the most. So a bug in production is a nightmare. So you should be very focused on exception and error handling. Try to incorporate that concept whenever you're trying to code. So every language has its own exception handling. There are different libraries and add-ons in the language. You should be focusing more than the C++ has a different way of exception handling. Java has a different. Python has a different. Uh, so next we would be talking about is debugging. Now this is also another area which is unexplored. Nobody's talking about debugging in general. So I have seen, I remember when I was in college and we were going through this. Debugging is something which, even faculties ignore. Nobody's talking about you should be able to debug because and the first reason for this is because you don't have that much of a code and people generally add printf statements and then they kind of debug through the code. That's not the correct way because you have millions of lines of code in industry, and you cannot add printf statement. There are different logging mechanisms, so there is no way you can add a printf statement and get to the root cause of the problem. So start focusing on debugging. Whatever tool you are using for Java folks, I would say if you're using Eclipse or IntelliJ or some other, for Python people using PyCharm or Anaconda or anything for that matter, just try and focus on debugging. The debugging is a different skill, which is a very notable skill. So you shouldn't be ignoring that. Whenever you're debugging through a program, try to put breakpoints, try to go through the program, try to get the values out of variables and how your program flow is going. Believe me, you would have a very good understanding of the code when you try doing this. So, uh, next, next I would talk about knowing the computer science fundamentals. Now, this is another thing which, at the end of this, you might wonder, okay, this is what we're doing all along. This is what we are doing from the first year to the final year of the BTech or BCMC, whatever. But how many of us are really focusing on these things? We you know study these subjects, we sit in the exams, we get some marks, but then at the end we forget about these things. And what we really are doing is we're just focusing on competitive coding and putting projects on a resume. But what you should be knowing is, first of all, you're nothing but a computer science engineer, and this is what you are known for. So if you do not know your computer science fundamentals, then I don't think you're really prepared for your placements or working in any company. Um, so there is a lot of things to talk about this, but I'll be making it brief because it's not possible to cover all the things here. But majorly was what I would suggest is you should be knowing your subjects well. The product-based companies are really focusing on service-based companies for that matter as well. So they're basically focusing on data sets and algorithms. You would have heard a lot of times is prepare for data sets and algorithms. Now, what that means is for pro approaching any problem, when you have a real life problem, you should know what kind of data structure are you using. So it's like saying some if you are using a heap for something, you cannot really use an array for that. And when I say you cannot, you might want to use it, but then your algorithms are not efficient and you cannot use it because you have a better way of doing it. So if you're using trees for something, you may not really want to use array for that. Uh, so the key point here is you should know your data structure and algorithms. When I say data structure algorithms, it means for all the data structure that you have in as a subject, like you have stack, you have queues, linked list, doubly linked lists, heaps, trees, graphs. You should be able to implement these structures on your own. It's not about just knowing the complexity of the structure, but any language that you are familiar with or you are trying to put in a resume. Let's say you're putting Java, or so you should be able to code all these things in Java. If interviewer asks you to implement in stack in Java, you should be able to come up with that. You should be able to write that code, and implementing a data structure is nothing but implementing all the operations that you have in that data structure. So if you're talking about trees, you should be able to come up with a tree structure. You should be able to implement all the insert operation, delete operation, search operation, any other operation that interviewer might ask you to. So, but you should be able to implement all these operations and come up with the complexity of the operation itself. So, if in if you're talking about C++ or C, you have pointers in there. So if you're trying to implement linked list, you have a different way of implementing it. But in Java, you have references, or in Python for that matter. So these other language like Java and Python, they are not offering you the pointers, so you should be able to come up with those structures in that language alone. So knowing data structure is basically knowing all the data structure and implementing them in any language that you prefer. But you should be able to come up with all the operations and you should be able to come up with the complexities. So, uh, Now, next, I would be talking about the algorithms, what all you should know in the algorithms part. Now, data structure is something which you basically use to store and retrieve the data. Now, what comes next is what kind of an algorithm you would be applying. So you would have heard of basically we are using for searching we are using linear search, we are using binary search. So those are two kind of algorithms that we could use, even though the underlying data structure is same. Let's say an array, but then you're using two different algorithms for searching in an array. How you're going to approach them depends on the complexity of algorithms and given data structure. So in short, if you are given a unsorted array, I don't think you can use binary search there, but if the array is sorted, you should be coming up with an algorithm which is efficient, say binary search. So in terms of algorithm, when we talk about an algorithm and optimal algorithm, you are basically focusing on an algorithm which gives you the best complexity in the worst case. So the minimum complexity. There are a lot of different algorithm paradigms that you should be knowing. In short, you should be familiar with all the searching and sorting algorithms, divide and conquer, greedy and dynamic programming. Just try start with the easier ones. Start with divide and conquer, and then probably move towards greedy and dynamic programming. I haven't put one thing here, but you should also be focusing on recursion, which is a very important skill. A lot of people who do not feel comfortable with recursion face a lot of issues because iterative way of doing things are a little lengthy and it doesn't look neat. So if you're able to understand the recursion, it's better. And that's mostly one thing which interviewers are going to touch upon. Next is the DBMS, database management systems. Now this is a secondary things, but yet it is important. Uh, After data structure and algorithms, interviewers would be looking for your database skills. Now, uh, and why this comes handy is because a lot of us would be directly interacting with different databases, and running a lot of queries day in day out. So interviewer is actually looking for your skills on the database side, and I'm not talking about very or big databases and graph databases here. I'm just talking about very simple relational databases. So if you have worked on SQL and Oracle DBs, which are mostly relational databases, you should be knowing certain operations on the databases and different knowledge about different keys. Like you should have a a firm understanding of what a candidate primary and super key means. You should have understanding of different way of storing your data in databases. You should be familiar with normalization. It's a very important question that sometimes freshers are asked. So you should be able to figure that out by yourself. And uh, what else? Sorry for the interruption. Yeah, so you should be able to figure out what kind of queries you might run. You should be able to figure out the different number of joins on WMS, what an indexing means, and all that stuff. Uh, I'm getting a few questions here. Anurag Bansal asking what should be the strategy of a student which is not placed in a product-based company till the end of the batch. Uh, I'll be covering this in a while. Feel free to ask any question that you have, which is basically related to the slide that you're able to see right now. It would be easier to answer those questions. So there's a question from Geeky Learner. The question is C sufficient for placement or do we need to master C++ as well? I think I've already answered this question, and it's the answer is no, because as I said, you should be proficient in any OOPS programming language. And why I say that, because C is basically lacking all the concept, because C is not an OOPS programming language. If you're familiar with C, you know that there is no classes concepts in C, and classes is something which is basically really mapping to the OOPS paradigm of things, where we are considering everything as an entity. So in C, you do not have these things. So knowing C is not enough. You should be able to come up with an OOPS programming language. Like you can start with C++. Knowing C is mandatory because there are companies which sometimes ask questions around pointers, and you have a firm understanding of linked list and pointers and how the pointers are working. Regarding address manipulation and values manipulation around strings and addresses in the memory. So knowing C is not sufficient, but yes, it is mandatory. So there's a difference between the two. And knowing an OOPS programming language is also mandatory. You cannot go with a non-OOPS programming language because then interview will not have anything to ask. And the only thing why we are saying OOPS programming languages is because that's how the industry is working nowadays. Nobody is basically working on any non-OOPS programming language unless and until very necessary, and they have legacy systems. Uh, so next is operating systems. Uh, this is asked, but very rarely. But I would say you should have a knowledge of this from interview point of view, because you're asked questions around scheduling algorithms. You are asked questions around semaphores, uh, different mutexes. So you should have a general understanding of operating systems, and you should be preparing regarding that. I think for this operating systems, you could be just searching or googling around, and you'd be able to find the questions that have been previously asked. There's a question from Kanak Mittal. While creating a resume, should we list projects from disparate disciplines? Uh, there is a slide on the resume, so I'd be covering this question there. Next thing, when we have talked about any programming languages and CS fundamentals, I would say CS fundamental is something which I haven't covered at length, but this is the most important part which you should be preparing before focusing on any practice, any competitive coding. Third point you should remember is to practice coding. Now, this is something which is not directly linked to an interview, but yes, this is a very important part. I'm talking about freshers here. It's different for the experienced interviewers because they would be thoroughly interviewed on this point itself. But if you are a fresher, you shouldn't be worrying much about it at this point. But then in the beginning, you would have already gone through such a scenario where in the beginning itself you are given some of the coding questions, and you have to clear those to enter the next round of interviews. Now, you should have generally you should be practicing good with your coding, and it's not about attempting too many questions and too many hard questions. It's all about knowing the syntax of the language, and generally the questions that you are asked are basically checking you on the syntax and little bit of logic. So I would suggest you can actually practice from Lead Code or HackerRank or anything that you prefer. But I have seen the Lead Code, and it's basically after the question is when you submit a question, you are given a different sort of scenarios with different complexities. So you can actually go through that and learn a lot. So try practicing. Start with easy questions and get yourself familiar with the language syntax, because there are questions and it's basically on different languages. So if you are working in Java, if you are coding in Python or C++, there are different ways of doing things. So by practicing these questions on these platforms, you get familiar you familiarize yourself with different way of STLs, which are standard libraries that any language is providing. uh, because when you are basically sitting an interview and you have a coding question, you probably know all the answers, but then you find yourself stuck with the syntax, and really never know how to use this. Taking an example of strings, there are a lot of string manipulations methods which are you're already given. There are different utilities that you are given by the language. So the only thing you have to remember is how to use those. So unless you practice your coding, practice on any coding platform, you would not be able to uh, really code this well. So I would just like to summarize this. You have different. You should be familiar with any OOPS programming language, and you should know it in and out. You can we'll be uploading this PPT for your reference, but then you can uh, also see the number of points that I've listed down. And you should be knowing your computer science fundamentals well. Next thing is practicing coding. Now, how is this different from a competitive coder? Competitive coders are basically focusing on very hard problems. I mean, their focus is basically on the coding. That's not the way how companies are looking. So you should be familiar with your fundamentals first and then try and code. Coding also depends on different companies that are coming to your campus, because if you look at different let's talk about Cisco or DirectEye or any company which is basically working with, keep looking for candidates on a data layer extraction. Then in that case you should be familiar with socket programming. You should be familiar with very low level programming syntax. But for high level and for other companies who are basically working on different not let's not talk about the embedded programming here. If you're not looking for that embedded programming, you shouldn't be focusing on the socket programming in particular. So whenever you're practicing practicing on any platform, just get yourself familiar with easy level of questions to get some confidence, and gradually get yourself familiar with the syntax of the language. And as and when you master some of those, you can try and work your way towards medium level questions and hard level questions. So for a third year or final year student who are just about to set in placement, I think you can start working with one or two medium questions a day and some of the easy questions, and try and include all the algorithms like divide and conquer, greedy, dynamic programming into your questions. You can in lead code you would see different categories of uh, problems. Try and pick one or two problems from each category and try to solve this. Uh, yeah. So, and this is the question that we have also been asked in chat. What is the role of programming languages? Now, I would say knowing one of the OOPS programming languages is enough. You shouldn't be really focusing on one or two languages or a back-end or front-end language. Although knowing more than a language or knowing a front-end or back-end language in particular is useful, but that's not the only key. If you know one programming language and you're good with your OOPS concept, I think it should be enough. And this is I'm talking about this from my experience of as an interviewer as well. We really never focus on a candidate knowing a lot of other things, because we generally focus on one language and then we try and interview around the same language. The key to success here is you should be able to come up with solutions, and you should be able to write, as I already said, you should be able to write the code in that language itself. It's not like you've written Java on your resume, but then you're inclining more towards Python or C++. So you should write one language on your resume. You should be knowing that language in and out. You should be able to debug in that language, and you should be able to answer all the questions around that language theoretically. So there are different. If you are familiar with C++, you have diamond problem in C++. You have a concept of virtual classes. That concept does not exist in Java. So you have interfaces in Java, you never come across a diamond problem there. So you should be answering a question accordingly based on the language that you are familiar with. Now, the next is a rule of the projects done. Uh, so there was a question on how many of those projects should be on your resume. The answer here is you shouldn't be. Let's say you do like 5 projects during your grad, and you're putting all those projects together. I think it's a good thing to put all these, but then yeah, you should be familiar with all those projects. You should be able to answer all the questions regarding all the projects. So, interviewer is never really asking you for a number of projects. If you have put just one project, nobody is gonna bother you with the number of projects that you have done. The only thing that arises in the interview is you will be asked about that project alone, and you should be able to answer all those questions. So, and try. I know a lot of us have in the college we have many or major projects that we have done. Try and focus on the same project, and if you haven't done already, try mastering that project. If you haven't implemented that project on your own, try and work out it. Try working out those projects again. Try focusing on different technologies that you have used and different concepts that you have used. So use your projects should really be focusing on a lot of other things, like the front end technology that you've used, the back end technology that you've used, the database that you've used. If you've used a relational database, you should be able to know which database, what are the queries that you have put together, what was the system design, not the system design, but the database design. So if you have like 5 tables in your database, why did you choose to put those 5 tables there? The question is, were you able to normalize this? If you did not, why you didn't? So there are certain questions which you would be asked. So you should be very you should be familiar with, and you should be able to answer all the questions, why you took this decision and why your database looks like this. What is the primary key that you used and why? What how much of your database was normalized? All that stuff. So it's not about the number of projects. If you really want to showcase your skills, you can put those, but then again, you should be able to answer all the questions. You should not be confused during your interview and leave it there. That reflects bad on your resume. And regarding the number of projects, again, you should be keeping it to bare minimum, because the more the number of projects that you put on your resume, you're inviting more number of questions from interviewer. And if you have more questions, it's likely that you would be stuck on one or the two, one or two, or any of the questions. So try and keep your projects to minimum, and try to keep those which you have really worked on and you really know about in and out. I think this answers connect Mittal's questions. If we should be project keeping project from multiple disciplines, I think you can keep them, as long as you're sure about what you have done, and you would be able to answer the questions. But from a fresher's point of view, company is never really looking for a candidate who would be exposed to different technologies. It depends on the when you're hired for a company, it depends on the position which is open and the kind of projects that company is working on. So once you're hired, certainly you'd have multiple roles open, and you could display your interest of which project you want to work on, but then there are limited number of career paths that you have, and you may not. So there is a choice of going for Java or Python or C++, but then again in Python you would be able to expose to certain kind of projects, and you may not at the same time work on front end back end technologies. So it's good for you to display your skills, but then you should be able to answer all the questions, just not reflect it badly on your resume. Next, we would be talking about aptitude, which I think lot of us are basically ignoring all the time, and when we're really focusing on coding and other stuff. I think this is one of the basic skill that you should all have, and this is basically used by all the companies as a filtering round. So whenever a company goes for a campus placement, the first round of interview is basically an aptitude round, which is used as a filtering tool by the companies. So please understand that whenever companies interviewing you, first 2 to 3 rounds are basically elimination round, and the next round when you're sitting for a face-to-face interview are basically selection rounds. So that's how companies are looking at it, and they're basically trying to knock you out in this round as well. So you should be really prepared with your aptitude, and because this is you would never really get to show your skills unless you pass this round. So aptitude is one more important thing that everyone should be focusing on. And for I would say for service-based companies, this is one of the major rounds that they might you know give you some leniency on the classification algorithms round, but the aptitude is something which they are really are focusing on. I think when you're preparing for your interviews, preparing just five like half an hour or hour a day of aptitude is more than enough. You have a lot of resources on the internet. There's limited set of questions that you are basically asked during aptitude. So if you look at, I think for Geeks for Geeks listed down all the aptitude questions for you from different companies. So you can go and check those out. When I say aptitude, it's not just the basic quant questions that you would be getting. There are a lot of reasoning and verbal questions and questions around different CS fundamentals which come under aptitude. So there are a lot of, for example, if you're asked different scheduling algorithms from operating systems, different complexities in some order from data algorithms, you should be able to answer those. So aptitude is not just, some quant questions or reasoning or verbal questions, but also from the CS fundamentals which could be put in your test. So knowing theory is as much as important as knowing your coding and programming languages. So I have got some questions around the aptitude as well. So I think this answers the questions around aptitude. Yes, it is really important. You should be focusing on aptitude as well. So I'll be summarizing all these things in the end, but when you're preparing for placements, you should be really putting these things onto your to-do list, which is aptitude, your CS fundamentals, your coding practice, and all that stuff. Because if you lose at least any one of these, I think it's a blocker for you. Uh, Next thing, which is very important from what I see, is resume. Uh, Now, think of it about it. You are given as an interviewer, if you're given a resume, and out of a lot of other resumes, you filter out some of them. You never really know the candidates from uh, you know then and there. You look at the resume, you look at the skills, and then you basically filter out the candidates. A resume is something which you are basically offering to your employer, or basically what you're trying to present. So your resume should be very neat and clean. And when I say neat and clean, what I mean is you should be writing all the facts that you know. I mean, your resume shouldn't be built like different skills and something which you have heard about. Try to be clear and concise. You should be only writing facts, and you should be following a clear template of how to write resumes. You shouldn't be writing project something that you have come across or you haven't really worked on. So try and put something that you have really worked on. Try to put all the skills that you really know about. Do not think of putting number of languages just for showing off. And I'm saying this because I have seen people doing this. So stick to what you know. If you're putting a programming language in your resume, know only things that you have worked on. Try and put only those things. You should be writing facts, and when I say facts, it's like you have worked on some projects, but you weren't really focused on working on the projects because you have worked in a group. So try and put only that project that you have really worked on and you have knowledge of. So it's not bad about doing projects in group, but then you should be able to say that you have worked on this part of the project and you can explain that part well. Next thing that I've seen people doing is, putting different behavioral skills on your resume, which is something that employers really do not focus that well because, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be putting those. But what I'm saying is, like, if you're putting a skill like I'm a hard worker, or I'm, I I think time management is something that is, great to put on your resume, but you should be really, sure about what you're putting here. Putting a hardworking or time and managing student or candidate isn't that worthy. Avoid lengthy resumes. I think for a fresher, an ideal resume would be of a page, because this is something that employers do not look at very. They are not very fond of looking at, very lengthy resumes. So if you have to go to another page, I think they are already losing interest in your resume. So if you're even if you have a lengthy resume, try and put all the necessary things that you want to highlight on the first page, and then put everything else on the second page. So if you have some publications during your graduation, if you have worked on some projects, your education, and any achievements, like you have, a lot of people are actually the competitive coders. They are sitting in different competitions, and they are the rank holders. Try putting that on your first page. Try creating spaces so that, uh, the candidate or the interview in the interviewer is able to, go through the resume in one shot. uh, yeah, I think that's most about the resumes. Let me see if I have any questions on resumes. I think we've already covered the questions on resume. So resume is one of the important things that candidate miss out, and nobody's really focused about it. But yes, interviewers take it seriously, and your resume should be neat and clean. It should only contain facts, and whatever you write on your resume, you should be able to explain that, because you could get questions from any corner of the resume, and you should have a fair idea of what you have written. Uh, the next thing that we have on our list is communication. I would say yes, it matters. It's important. A lot of us do not really focus on communication, and it's not about just knowing about the plain English or any language for that matter. A lot of people are confused regarding communication. This is knowing English is what we need. I don't think if you consider a non-software engineer and sitting in an interview for a software-based company, even though he or she has good communication skills in English, they might not be able to explain around any question or projects. So knowing English is as much as important as knowing your content. So when I say communication, it's both knowing the facts, knowing the content of your subjects, knowing the things around that, and then be able to explain that clearly. It's not about the English, but how you present yourself. And yes, it matters, because a lot of companies who are trying to hire candidates, I'm saying this from experience. You have a lot of people to deal with. During your day, you have a lot of things that you communicate to other teams or folks, or you're communicating with folks around the world. So you should be really able to explain what you're saying. You should have a clarity of thoughts on what you're saying, and that's when communication is required. Regarding an interviewer's perspective, how communication matters in an interview. So you should be able to clearly state what you are saying, because a lot of times when questions are asked, people they know the concept, but then they are failing to state. They are not able to speak their mind, and that's when it matters. If you know the question, if you know the answer, and you're not able to explain that clearly, it's a complete failure on your part. So you should be practicing this. I think yes, and the language. If it's not your native language or the primary language, yet people hesitate to speak it out, but you should be practicing and trying for some mock interview rounds where you are really answering some questions, and that's how it would be helping you. If you don't know any answer to any question, try and say no, because then this basically looks good on your part. because that's when if you enter into an industry, if you say yes for without knowing anything, I think that's the real blunder. So try saying no when you don't know anything and ask for help. If you're given a question by the interviewer, clarifying the question in the beginning is a very good idea. If you're not sure about uh, the question itself, or you're not sure what the question was, if there is a gap between what the interviewer is trying to ask and what you understood, you should really be clarifying the question first. You should be clarifying the requirements and then proceed with the question, proceed with the answer. In most of the cases, interviewers are very helpful, so you should be asking for any hints that interviewer could provide or something that you did not understand. They would really be happy to help you. But and it's far more important than not completing the question or try and coming up with the wrong solution only because you did not understand the question clearly. So try and clear out the doubts in the beginning and then proceed with the question. Discuss with what interviewer is asking and what is the expected output. So that's all we have for today, and I'll try to see if there are any questions and answer them. Okay, there's a question coming from Spartacus. What should we do in third year to crack product-based companies? Uh, I think this it's a similar process for third and fourth, finalist students. So for finalist students, we can say this is a crash course, so they have to do it very quickly because they would be setting the placements very soon. But for third year students, I would suggest you to work on these things from scratch. If you haven't built up your CS concepts, try building up those. I think that's one thing, and try practicing coding. Just one or two questions a day. Start with easy questions, but most importantly, know one oops language in and out. Try have a hands on the language and master your CS fundamentals. I'm stressing on this fact because that's what you are. You are a software engineer, you are a computer science engineer, and most of all, you should be knowing how to theoretically what CS means, what a data structure means, what are different algorithms that we are using. So, for the third year students, I would say you should be mastering your concept first and then moving towards other things. Uh, there is a question from Anurag Bansal that what should be a strategy of student if he or she is not placed in the product base till the end of the BTech? Uh, yeah, it's a really good question. I hope it doesn't happen, but yes, if it happens for some reason, there are a lot of product and service-based companies which do not visit your campus, but there are a lot of opportunities outside, and I would say there are a lot of platforms nowadays where you can apply and reach out to people. LinkedIn is a very famous platform where people are trying and reaching out to different folks, uh, different alumni, and if not alumni, you can just reach out to somebody who's working in that company which you are interested in. Try projecting your skills, try sharing your resume, and I think people would be happy to refer you to their companies if they feel skills are good enough for the company. And there are a lot of other websites or uh, you know platforms where you can put up your resume, try for different jobs. The only advice I would give you is never stop trying, because there are a lot of companies who are still looking for good candidates and they're not finding them. So if you feel you're one of them, I think you can keep applying for the companies. Try building your skills, and the day you build your skills, I don't think you know I think this question here won't even matter then. You would already be placed. So this entire session was basically regarding how you should be approaching your placements, how should you be preparing for those. And I think if you know do justice to these things, you practice a lot of time, you do good enough practices, you know your fundamentals well, you would already be placed. Um, so I don't think there are other questions on this. So this was very, this was wonderful having to share my experience with all of you, and it's been. I'm seeing one more question there, so let me just try answer that before winding out. So there is a question from Graphian about the product-based companies. Uh, so basically, the product-based companies and how they differ is product-based companies have their own products which are designed, and uh, those are the companies where a lot of design skills and core development of product goes. You could talk about Microsoft, Goldman itself, Amazon, Facebook, and then there are service-based companies which are basically providing services to other companies. They have certain clients which they are providing services to. So you could talk about Infosys, TCS, Wipro. So major data set and algorithm skills are what product-based companies generally need, and service-based companies, on the other hand, are basically focusing more on aptitude and communication skills because they have a lot of client exposure and you have to talk to different clients while working. You have to work on different client sites at the same time. So service-based companies are not that much focused on knowing your data and algorithms. And if I don't want to sound wrong here. They focus on this, but product-based companies are focusing more on that front. With this, I would like to conclude this. In summary, you should all be, you know, preparing with one of the OOPS programming languages and knowing your CS fundamentals well, and then preparing for the coding. Now, you shouldn't really be a competitive coder for, to get into product or service-based companies. You just uh, practice minimal coding so that you're aware of the data structural algorithms that you're going to use, and you should be able to, you should have hands-on so that you can code when you're given something. Thank you all. With this, we can wind up this session. It was great getting all the questions from you all, and in future, we would be happy to connect again.
Thank you so much, Sandeep, for sharing your experience and taking the question of candidates. So I hope Sandeep has answered all your questions. If you have more questions, you can always write your questions in the comments and he'll be happy to answer you. So I think we are done for the day. Now we'll disconnect. If you have more queries or more suggestion regarding this, surely do write in the comments of this video. I have got a feedback from most of you that sound is not working fine. There is some echo. I'm sorry for that. Next time if we do so, we'll really check again. Because last time it was working fine, but this time I think there is some issue, technical issue. So we'll try to solve it next time for sure. So thank you so much, guys.